BBC.
You're with the BBC World Service. And now, Witness. And as the BBC World Service finally says goodbye to Bush House, its home for the last 70 years, Andrew Whitehead, the editor of World Service News, takes you back to its first broadcasts from the building during World War II.
This is London calling in the overseas service of the BBC. Here is the news. The British ultimatum to Germany expired this
London
morning.
calling. War brought with it a huge expansion in the BBC's broadcasts to the world. The immediate priority was new language services for Europe, initially based in Broadcasting House alongside the rest of the BBC. But as Martin Esslin of the German service recalled, the war put paid to that.
One morning in May 1941, I arrived at my office and it had gone. A bomb had fallen nearby. From then on, we were all in Bush House.
There was a huge room, and in one corner were the Czechs, in another corner were the Bulgarians, in another corner were the Yugoslavs, Slovenes, Serbocrat. And they used to come in with the news stories and say, "Are you the Romanians? Are you the Czechs?" And I said, no, other corner. It was hilarious.
Lisa Hirsch, now 92, was from a German Jewish family which moved to Slovenia when Hitler came to power. She found herself in London as war broke out doing a secretarial course. A linguist and an émigré, she gravitated towards the BBC's European service. And as Martin Esslin remembered, she wasn't alone.
Here, assembled by the chances and vicissitudes of war, was a real microcosm of European intellectual life. Distinguished people from France, Italy, Belgium, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and all the other countries, and some of the best brains in this country, were working together in a spirit of real fraternity. I can't think of a better word. Some had happened to be in London at the time, and others had arrived during the retreat of their forces from the continent.
They had one typist there who was, I think, probably the best typist I've ever come across. And she was Princess Bagration, the real thing, you see. And like most people who are the real thing, she wasn't a bit conceited or anything about it. And she could read a novel while she was being dictated. Of course, before you could be employed, you had to pass tests, exams, whatnot. Do you touch type? Yes. And you understand Serbocrat? Yes, I understand Serbocrat. And so she said, count till 10, and all right. And then she dictated something to me. And then she said, right, gentlemen, she understands the language. She types exactly at half the speed I type. So will you kindly dictate at half the speed? And I haven't had a day off in 8 weeks. Goodbye.
So your first job in the BBC was at Broadcasting House.
That's it.
Shortly after war started.
That's it.
Typing in Serbo-Croat.
Yes. That was all right until I made some sort of ghastly mistake.
In spite of these transgressions, and at one point being fired by the BBC as an enemy alien, Lisa Hirsch was eventually promoted. Once the Yugoslav service had made the move to Bush House, she became an announcer, broadcasting in Slovene.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed broadcasting. I'm an extrovert, you see, and that is the thing for extroverts to do.
Their private lives were completely disorganized, but anyhow, most of them hardly had any private lives. In the crowded rooms and corridors in the basement, at first from a very small number of improvised studios, the voice of Britain and the voice of the occupied countries was going out strongly and steadily.
Esslin was, you know about Esslin.
From the German service?
Yes, he was a tiny man, brilliant. There was a lady in the queue behind me, and I was said to somebody, when I get bored at meetings, I look around the table and I think to myself, now, if I had to go to bed with one of them, which one would I least mind going to bed with? And I think although Esslin is small and has got bandy legs, I have a suspicion he's good in bed. And the lady behind me said, he is, I'm his wife.
If you'll come with me on a short tour through the newsrooms. This way.
In the foreign news departments, we get copies of each news story in English, and these we may use as material for our own bulletins.
The sub-editors responsible for the foreign news services are all British subjects, specialists not only in the countries which are their concern, but also in the background of world affairs. They work, of course, in close contact with the staffs of translation experts, who are all natives of the countries to whom they speak.
And the end of the story comes as this announcer walks to the microphone. The bulletin lies on the table before him. He opens his mouth, and in less time than it takes the sound of his voice to cross the studio, his voice is being heard in the distant places to which it is directed.
In Ankara,
Argentina,
Australia,
Arabia,
Buenos Aires,
Barcelona.
The BBC began the war broadcasting in English and 7 other languages. By its end, it was on air in more than 40. Leaders in exile, France's General de Gaulle, and an array of Europe's kings, queens and princes made their way to the BBC studios to record messages for their Nazi-occupied homelands.
Of course, King Håkon, wasn't there, from
Norway.
King Håkon turned up in a taxi or something and sat down and waited his turn. So the receptionist said, "Yes, and who are you? What do you want?" He said, "Well, actually, I am King Håkon." They weren't so good at their geography, so they rang the Danish section and said, "Your king is here." They said, "No, our king is not there. Our king is back home." And the receptionist said, "Excuse me, sir, which country are you king of?"
Bush House was part of the war effort and as such a potential target, even more so with the Air Ministry nearby. In June 1944, a German V-1 flying bomb landed just outside the building.
My sister, she was with the Yugoslav emigre government. She was only 17 as a telephonist. So somebody went in and said, "Does your sister work at Bush House?" "Yes." "Oh dear." "Why?" "They've been obliterated." So my sister, bless her, came to dig me out. But she thought before she started helping to dig me out, she better prepare our parents. And I answered the phone and she sobbed into the phone, "You're at home." I said, "Yes, I'm at home. So what?" "You're alive." "Well, obviously I'm alive, am I not?"
Can you remember seeing the damage caused by the V1 attack?
There was a large post office on the ground floor
Of Bush House?
of Bush House. So 41 people were in there at lunchtime queuing. No survivors.
So 41 people who were inside Bush House using the post office were killed in that V1 attack.
Just like that. And upstairs, the secretary of the chief language supervisor, Morrison, his secretary, a beautiful young girl, was disfigured for life.
Bush House weathered this and other crises. The building became firmly established as the home of the World Service. The era now ending as the BBC bows out of Bush House had its roots in those broadcasts 70 years ago to a continent at war.
This is London calling. Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead. I repeat that. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead.
Now that the BBC is leaving Bush House,
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I think sad. It was an absolutely wonderful place to work in. And I wish them luck, that's all I can say.
Lisa Hirsch ending Witness from Andrew Whitehead.